Another edition of Riding Home. This time, Dean and Dylan figure out the path for Georgia moving forward in this season. This week, Kentucky for the Dogs, Dylan. And on Monday, as we talked about at practice, didn't look a lot different. We'll see what they look like here the rest of the week on Wednesday. But isn't this about executing from here on out for Georgia? I mean, they will probably be favored in every game they play. Maybe not Auburn, but probably Auburn.
Do you think it'll be favored against Florida still?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Florida is a 5 or 6 point favorite in Columbia. I mean, all the numbers have been that Georgia's anywhere from a 5 to 8 point favorite in Jacksonville over over the Gators. Yeah. Oh, yeah. They'll be favored. How much is a good question, but Florida's not played well this year, man. I mean,
I know, but I mean, it depends where they go from here. But against LSU, I thought they looked really good. I thought they played.
They allowed a lot of points, and I think that's the issue right now. Is that Florida's offense struggles. Georgia's offense played about as poorly as it could play. It scored 17 points against a defense that's okay, not as good as Florida's. But I think the question for the Gators is. There's a lot of issues for the Gators. I mean, the quarterback, as it relates to the quarterback and his durability, that's an issue. Well, first of all, they got to escape Columbia. I mean, they can lose to South Carolina, beat Georgia, and still win the East, but they've got to get out of Columbia alive. They've still got to deal with Georgia, and they've still got to deal with Missouri. So the leaders in the East, if you will, still have to all play each other. But to me, Florida, in the time that I've watched them play, they have been rough on the edges and around the edges, I should say. And on the edge defensively, they have issues if those kids aren't going to play. And it doesn't look like they're going to play against South Carolina. Will they be healthy enough for Georgia? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see. That's a few weeks away.
If they don't have those guys, they're going to have problems. But meanwhile, Kentucky comes into this game with someone who Kirby compared to Hines Ward. This really is a game that Georgia should slow Kentucky down on offense. They look really bad against South Carolina on the road. I don't know how this should be really much different, but after last week, it's tougher to trust the Dogs. That's for sure.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I was going to say, last week we were pretty confident in them going into the South Carolina game, but I mean, Kentucky is not as good, and
no.
A Hines Ward comparison, I get what he's going for. I see what he means by it. But I mean, he's like Hines Ward, not to be confused like that. He is the quality of Hines Ward.
I mean, Kentucky has a substantial defensive line. They have, but they are not as good as they were last year. Kentucky, and that game was in Commonwealth Stadium. It really gave them a chance to win the East, the Cats. But unless we're sitting here talking about another 4 turnover performance from Georgia, I just don't see how that Georgia loses this game. They're a huge favorite again, and Kirby's teams have bounced back really well after losses.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at the past 2 years, 2018 LSU and 2017 Auburn, I mean, they played their best football after those losses. Last year after LSU was the bye week, and then, a solid game against Florida, another solid game against Auburn, and a beatdown at Kentucky. I mean, it was 3 solid games against 3, not phenomenal opponents, but 3 very good opponents.
They were top 10 teams. I mean,
yeah.
two of them were. I mean, and the other thing, by the way, too, I mean, Kentucky's won in Athens, if my memory serves correct, once since I've been alive, I think, which was 2000.
It's like 60s.
2009. So it's not been an ideal situation for the Cats in Athens. With that said, their win over Arkansas last week, they're coming in 3-3. They've not given up on the season, and they had Florida beat and let them off the hook. So that was rough. But it's, I think for Kentucky, they could really run against Arkansas. They had one guy, Bowden, had almost 200 yards rushing, and he was playing quarterback.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's he's the Heinz Ward, if you will. I mean, he's a very versatile player, and is something you got to watch out for. But
But
I don't think it's a huge issue for Georgia. Bad news.
yeah, so in their last 14 games, the Cats were 9-5. That's the best stretch since they did the same exact mark about 60 years ago in the
Sheesh.
1950s. So 19 late 1950s. So almost 70 years ago. So it's been some time that Kentucky. This is not bad for Kentucky. Frankly, the other thing is the Cats have allowed 24 points or fewer in 17 of their last 20 games. Now, one of those games was not against Georgia last year, so that was one of the games that stuck out. But Mark Stoops has done a pretty good job at Kentucky. He has an overall losing record. He's never beaten the Dogs, but they're hanging in there, and they've got a shot.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, no, he's doing, I think, a awesome job with that Kentucky program. I mean, look how well they did last year, and even this year. They lose Benny Snell and Josh Allen, two dudes who are all SEC guys, and they're still kicking it. I mean, they should have probably beaten Florida.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and not like Florida played that well, but that would have been a huge win. And even to play them tight was big for them.
Well, you look at this from here on out. They've got 3 wins. Georgia seems like asking a lot. I think beating Missouri at home is not out of the question, but I
It's a
think
tough game,
that's
but yeah.
that's so. But and then their last 4 games are totally winnable, and they're not all certain wins, but they're totally winnable. I mean, you host Tennessee, you play at Vanderbilt, you certainly should beat Vanderbilt. You play Tennessee Martin. Those are 2 games for sure that you should win, and then you end the season with Louisville. So this game will turn on, or their season, Kentucky will turn on those last 4 games, not so much these 2 games where they play two of the teams that could end up 1-2 in the East. We'll see. I mean, look, Missouri, they're not bad at all, and their only win in Georgia since they've come into the league was in Athens, but I'm a little skeptical that they're going to be able to beat Georgia in Athens and win out too, I guess. And also, by the way, the whole thing hanging over Mizzou right now is, will they be allowed to play in the SEC championship because they're banned from postseason play as it stands right now.
Well, then it wouldn't be allowed, right?
I'm going to be. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm smart enough to understand the ins and outs of the NCAA's appeal process. So I think that right now they're out. But that doesn't mean they're out in the future.
Okay, because I remember when was it? Whenever the Pac-12, I think in their second year, because USC was still on the postseason ban then, and they won the South, and but they couldn't go, so they sent 6-6 UCLA instead.
Yeah, Georgia Tech has benefited from that in the past. The interesting thing about the last time, and I remember this well. I mean, Georgia had beaten Auburn the week before, a ranked Auburn team in 2009, and they just looked like they had started figuring things out. That a 10-win season, as bad as that year was in 2009, was not, totally out of the question. I mean, that season they started on the road against against Oklahoma State. They lost a game that was sort of questionable officiating against LSU, number 4 LSU in Athens. And they got curb stomped at Tennessee and lost to number 1 Florida. But after beating Auburn, they were they sat at they were 6-3 with 2 more games to play, with 3 more games to play. So they couldn't have gotten to 10 wins, but they could have gotten to 9. And with they just came out and just played horribly against Kentucky on offense. They had 4 turnovers in the second half. Does that sound like someone that you know? And Kentucky converted them into 14 points. And Kentucky won that game and closed it out. It was a 34-27 win. Georgia was driving to tie the game. There was a fumble right at the end of the game on the bridge end zone. Kentucky fell on it. Washaun Ely and Joe Cox my suspicion was that it was Sean Ely who screwed up, but I don't know. I'm just going off of memory what happened. And I will never forget the interview that I had with Joe. That was senior night. And he said no one wants to go out a loser, and essentially said we're going out a loser. But he said the word loser a lot in that time, and I really felt for Joe. And a week later they pulled off what was a stunning upset over a top 10 Georgia Tech team in Atlanta with the stadium frothing. They just knew they were going to beat Georgia for the second time in a row for the first time in a while. And but those 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, it was bad. That was last decade, but that's one of the 4 times of late that Georgia's had a negative 4 turnover margin and they lost the game. This was not as dominant a Georgia performance in 2009. I mean, they had 22 first downs to 15. Total yards was 487 to 260. So they kind of dominated Kentucky in that sense, but they lost 2 interceptions. They lost 2 fumbles. They fumbled it 4 times, and Kentucky used that. They used those turnovers to win the game. And I mean, Georgia was up 27-13 in that game with about 20 minutes to go in that contest. An amazing collapse from that 2009 team. And it goes to show that if you do not take care of the ball, reoccurring theme this week, that you will lose. I want one last rambling thought here, which was that in that game, Georgia was a 9-point favorite, so a significant favorite to be sure, and they lost.
Yeah, sounds familiar. That happened last week.
It was not ideal. But practice this week has been, what, normal?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of picked up on this in 2017. It's just, I mean, after these losses, nothing really seems to be different. And I think people are always looking, and myself included, I always go out there thinking, okay, coaches are going to be on their ass this week. It's going to be, a lot of yelling and a lot of running, whatever. But everything always seems normal, and the players always seem relatively calm after these. I remember in 2017, I think right after that Auburn blowout, I think it was Javon Wims and John Atkins. I think before interviews, they were just sitting laughing on their phones. Yeah. And it just seemed like everything, because from the outside perspective, fans looking at it as if the world's crumbling down on Georgia, and especially then last year against LSU, and even now. But I mean, within the program, they understand what's in front of them, and they're cool with it. They're very calm, and they just know that they have to win out. The situation they are in right now is no different than it was in 2017 and then in 2018. The loss just looks worse, but the situation is really no different.
The loss looks worse, certainly, because of who it was and than the fact that they had a losing record coming into the game. But they of course, were beaten much worse by LSU and Auburn. They hurt themselves more in the game against South Carolina than they did against LSU or Auburn. It was more self-destructive. And if you're into self-destructing, you can kill yourself off. I mean, it's the best way to lose a game is by doing it to yourself, because the other team, doesn't even have to do much. And in this case, South Carolina took full advantage of what Georgia gave them. I mean, Kirby said we gifted them 4 turnovers, and he's right. Yeah,
I mean, let's look. I mean, the fumble was a total gift. Yeah. That one was just, served on a platter to South Carolina. And then the interceptions, I'm trying to recall all of them.
Well, the pick 6 was a good play by that kid, for sure.
But still, it's a good play, but
it was a good play by that kid. The Tyler Simmons interception, that just can't happen. That cannot happen. And then Fromm had the had the one throw that was just an errant throw. Look, Jake Fromm didn't play well. I think if you watch the game more and more, it becomes clear he just didn't play the way he normally does. And how many times is he going to play that poorly?
It seems like once a season.
Yeah. But he plays like that once a season. But that also means that the big thing people are freaking out about, and they're right to. I get it. Fans have the right to be pessimistic or alarmed or whatever. But what they're the most correct about is, hey, there's no margin of error anymore. Well, that's true. But if you get to Atlanta, there wouldn't have been margin of error there. I mean, there probably wouldn't have been. And
as it stands right now, but now there is certainly no margin of error.
Correct.
But a lot more reason to worry, I guess, if you're a fan.
Well, they're still going to be favored in all these games. And the question is, as it stands right now, if you lose to Kentucky, obviously you can still win the division, amazingly, but you're out of the national championship hunt. But this is about winning national championships. If this were about something other than that, then you'd still have Mark around, and things would be the culture would be different. It's not acceptable to lose to South Carolina. Period. And one of the few teams that Kirby has not lost to in his time. He's lost to a lot of Eastern schools. He's lost to Tennessee, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, obviously Florida. He's not yet lost to Kentucky, and Kentucky's had a really good team in that time, which was last year.
He hasn't lost to Missouri either, has he?
Hasn't lost to Missouri, and Missouri's been good during his time, but I think they've been.
They're better during Mark's years, but
I think they were better during Mark's time. But when you look at Missouri and what what they're sitting at right now, they're scoring points, which is what Missouri has done a lot. And in some cases, they're allowing maybe a little more than you'd be comfortable allowing. 37 points to Wyoming is not ideal. I would say 27 points to Mississippi is not ideal. But, Missouri has gotten it together, and they are certainly a contender, if not one of the leaders, and possible winners of the East. They look good. And if they had not lost to Wyoming, they'd probably be a top 12 team, if not a top 10 team.
Yeah, that's nuts to think about still, that they lost to Wyoming there.
I would say there's no chance that they could lose to Vanderbilt at home. On the road or anywhere. They've got to go to Kentucky, so that's tricky. But their biggest tests are the back-to-back weeks they have the week off before Georgia, but then they host Florida. I think that game is a toss-up as it stands right now. They're going to be an 8-point underdog or maybe a 10-point underdog to Georgia at home. They will not lose to Arkansas. That would be stunning. And Tennessee, in theory, could beat them out there. But I kind of doubt it. This looks like a Missouri team that's going to, at worst, go 9-3, if not, possibly 11-1.
I'm skeptical of that, but
yeah, I am too. but you can't know. They have kept themselves alive. They have, again, you go back to sort of shocking results in Sanford Stadium. When Missouri got 4 turnovers and Georgia didn't get any, and they had a -4 turnover margin, that was a shocking result to me when Missouri beat Georgia in 2013. And Missouri was ranked, but they just weren't well thought of. And they certainly could win the East, but they're going to have to beat both Georgia and Florida to do so, I think, because if I say that, maybe they won't. I don't know. Georgia's got their work cut out for them. Whether they had lost to South Carolina or not, they've got their work cut out for them. And we can talk about the Gators and Mizzou all we want, but this week they've got to deal with a quarterback who is fleet-footed and almost ran for 200 yards last week. And this is about Georgia. It's always about Georgia and what they do and what they can do. They've got to get it together offensively.
Yeah. Especially with explosive plays, that's been a conversation between us a lot. But Kirby highlighted that as well. I think he said the metric they use is, a rushing yard of 12 yards or more or passing play of 16 yards or more. But, I mean, that's what he's hounded that now for 2 straight days, that Georgia needs more of that, and that's probably their biggest thing on offense, besides turning the ball over, but that he's looking for.
Yeah, I would say for sure that explosive plays would change the dynamic at Georgia, because if there's one team that can drive the ball on you, it's the Dogs. But they need some easy, cheap points, and that's the part that I think, they just need to do a better job of getting that done, and we'll see. I would be a bit surprised if you didn't see some big explosive plays for the Dogs this weekend. But again, now Kentucky's defense is not that bad. They're not that bad.
They won't just hand it to them.
No,
on stuff like that.
They won't. The more I think about it, man, the more that Mizzou game is sticking out like, this is an important moment. The Missouri game is going to be
I mean, at this point, every single game is an important moment. And I know how Kirby smart that sounds to say, but it really is. I mean, all these games are not gimmies anymore.
No. And it's an important time / moment for the Dogs. And it's, I had one guy say to me earlier this week, we're going to see, this leadership Jake Fromm gets so much credit for. I mean, this is the time to be a leader. And we'll just see how, that goes. I mean, he's more than capable, that's for sure. And it's not all on him if they lose from here on out necessarily, but it is on everybody to play as well as they can play. And that's just something that did not happen against South Carolina. They probably will have their attention, but look, they got to go prove it. And we'll be here to talk about it. Go to the website, dogpost.com. If you're not a subscriber, you can subscribe below. Dogpost.com, DAWGPOST. Thanks for joining us. Tomorrow, we've got some descriptive statistics and analysis from a professor who studies coaching, so that should be interesting. And you can see up here, I'm going to put Kirby's audio from yesterday, or Kirby's press conference from yesterday up above. So click to subscribe. Go watch Kirby's video from yesterday, and we'll see you on the website.